Hello there and welcome to day 3 of Radio Days from Autistic Radio. We're here every Christmas, between Christmas and New Year, and the main reason is the backstage area. It's in the backstage area between 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. every day of the 27th, 28th, 29th and 30th, where people meet up, where people hang out with other autistic people, or make their first steps towards finding a group of like-minded people in a very gentle way. When you join the backstage area, you don't even need to enter the room. You can stay outside, listen to what's going on, and you can text to make your thoughts known. And if you want, you can come in the room and talk with other people with no cameras, no recording. We also have examples of the kind of experience you get in the backstage area at the 444. Obviously, the regular contributors here know that they're being recorded for the 444, but people who are new to us, they don't get recorded. They're just there to experience things. So consider, if you're feeling a little bit isolated out there without other autistic people to keep you company, joining us here at Autistic Radio will make you very welcome. The show today is about showing what we do here at Autistic Radio in cooperation and co-production with professional organisations. We feel that that's one of the activities that we do around also networking ourselves that gives us a focus. This year we had a very interesting co-production with BUILD, the Restraint Reduction Network. We were asked to make vox pops, small recordings of people's thoughts at a conference, the Restraint Reduction Conference. And I'm going to play some of those for you today because very often the autistic community doesn't get to experience up front what some of the professionals are feeling and thinking. And I think if we listen to their words here, we're going to feel better about it. I'll start off with the one I've called number 1. It's a gentleman called Steve Brown. The Autistic Radio Conference Tour 2025 is a co-production with BUILD, the Restraint Reduction Network, and Autistic Association. We are open to co-productions with professional organisations where our ethics and interests coincide and align. This short series of short podcasts demonstrate cooperations that are possible, recordings with people at the conference, speaking openly, clearly, with equity in the communication. Hello there. Can I just ask you to say who you are and where you're from?
I'm Steve Brown. I am the PBS lead for the qualifications at BUILD.
I've just taken you from a stand outside. What's that stand there for?
We are looking to give information to delegates at the conference on our charities that we've got. So there are a couple of charities all under the sort of the banner of BUILD. We've got obviously BUILD with the training and workforce development stuff. We have Respond, who is a new charity to BUILD, looking at how trauma affects people. And obviously we've got the RRN stand as well, again promoting reduction and restraint. And obviously we've got BUILD Act, who are across from us as well. So we've got the 4 charities represented here. And a lot of it is to try and share information about listening to people, what their stories are, and trying to help people improve people's quality of life.
So how does a charity do that in a practical way?
A lot of it is understanding what's happening for individuals, maybe in their home or in a particular service somebody might be in. We look at how we can improve practice by helping people understand what that should look like. Obviously, we're talking a lot about restraint reduction and how we can implement that across lots of environments that people are living in currently, and what should happen for people. So thinking about people's rights and how we can protect those, making sure that people are aware about what's going on. Certainly there's lots of talk around today around how restrictive practice is visible in communities and how that can be stopped as well. So we do lots of information sharing. For me in particular, we're looking at how we can promote training within organisations and get people actually competent at delivering some of those services better with proper competency checks.
Ah, so now I understand. You're the people who teach the people to use restraint appropriately rather than as the go-to intervention.
Well, we don't teach people restraint. So one things we try to avoid at Build is make sure people don't use restraint. And we look at more proactive strategies and interventions for people before we get to that point. So what we don't do is promote restraint at all at Build. It's one of the things that we don't do. But we try and show people, and I wouldn't call it teaching. It's more about mentoring and coaching people in better practices that can proactively support somebody so that they don't need to be restrained. So a lot of the things around restraint is where people have hit a crisis point where they may become, a danger to themselves. It could injure themselves or injure other people. And that's the point people start to get restrained. What we do is look at how we can positively, proactively support people before they get to that stage, to making people have got good environments that are around, that staff who are supporting them understand what's going on, and we can support people safely. So that we minimise and reduce restrictive practices and definitely reduce and stop using restraint.
So it's about making restraint unnecessary from the beginning then.
Yes, that's the ultimate goal, is to make it that it's not working. But we understand, when people are restrained, it doesn't fix anything. It causes a lot of trauma for the individual and that particular person. It's not good for people who are doing it either. So we want to make sure we better equip people with information about how they can support somebody without using restraint.
You've said the word trauma a number of times.
Yes. I think what we need to understand is if we are putting our hands on another person, that actually causes a scarring of that individual, and it causes a trauma to that person and the people who are doing it as well. And that's a very difficult thing to remove and to take away from somebody once that's happened. So we want to try and make sure people are better equipped so they understand what that impact can be on that individual. If you are physically restraining somebody, you are going to cause that person some trauma, and that's a very difficult thing to remove once that's taken place.
Wow. I notice here today that there's a lot of neurodivergent people who are also professionals. Is it necessary to go beyond their lived experience? Because surely if you've already got professionals who understand their autism or their other neurodivergence from the inside, why go to the general public and look for more examples?
I think, we live in a more diverse society now, and I think it's great that people with lived experience are getting more involved in some professional practices around what we do. I think society, again, is still a little bit sort of lacking behind about where we are, certainly within social care. I think it's about understanding everybody's perspectives and being, I think we need, there's been a lot of shift in society at the moment. We've lost some of that tolerance around different cultures and backgrounds about what people do independently. And I think we do need to get a wide variety of thoughts and opinions into practice. I think, we've got to get a lot of people involved who've got a lived experience, not just obviously people who are neurodiverse, but obviously people with learning disabilities, people with physical disabilities as well, and understand what that is for them, what works for them. But not just listening to single people's voices, get everybody involved in that process.
It's almost as though you're asking for people to advocate for themselves.
Yes, definitely. And I think that's the big, people need to stand up and tell us what they want. How do you want your day? How do you want your life? What's quality of life for you? And we're all different. Quality of life's very subjective, and everybody has their own individual, idiosyncrasies that they want in life, and therefore we've got to listen to those people, so we can provide a better society for people to fit into.
But the people you're asking to advocate yourselves, you recognise may have experienced trauma themselves. So there's a difficulty, isn't there?
There is a difficulty, and we've got to understand, we don't want people's trauma to be continually re-triggered, and we need to be really mindful of that when people are, getting into practices where they're talking to other people. We've got to be really careful that we don't keep re-triggering that for people, and people need to have the right level of support, allow people time out so them to re-regulate themselves and understand where they are really. And sometimes people will need quite a long time to get back into a good stable position. But yeah, we need to be more mindful about what's going on for individuals and how they are affected individually and personally.
We have an audience that's made up mostly of two groups: neurodivergent people and professionals listening to podcasts made with other professionals. Is there a message to send to each of those two groups from this conference?
Well, I think, be respectful of each other, listen to each other. Don't be judgmental about what's going on for other people. And remember, everybody's an individual and everybody has their own thing, plans of what they want to do themselves, and just be mindful of that. Don't impose your ideas or try to impose your ideas on other people, because they're not always fitting for that person. And just be respectful of each other's space and each other's thoughts, really.
Are you speaking to the neurodivergent group in that, or just to the professional group?
That's to everybody. I think it's about understanding that we've all got our own thoughts and opinions, and we want to work better and live to better as a more tolerant society. And that's for everybody, to be mindful of that for everybody.
It's lovely that you're one of the professionals here amongst a whole group of professionals that are working to reduce the use of restraint. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
How did you go? Are you okay with that?
Yeah, all good.
We speak our words, we listen.
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 I think that's a really good introduction, not just to that conference, but to the concept of restraint reduction and how it affects us as a whole society. What I heard Steve saying particularly was all of those inclusive concepts. And in this world at the moment, we have drive us towards exclusivity, towards us pushing ourselves into different silos. I'm really happy to hear a professional like Steve working towards that real Shangri-La goal of everybody being treated as an individual. I have another vox pop from the Restraint Conference, and I'm going to play that now for you. The Autistic Radio Conference Tour 2025 is a co-production with Build, the Restraint Reduction Network, and Autistic Association. We are open to co-productions with professional organisations where our ethics and interests coincide and align. This short series of short podcasts demonstrate cooperations that are possible. Recordings with people at the conference, speaking openly, clearly, with equity in the communication. This isn't a normal conversation. This is a constructed conversation. Everything you say will be edited. Normally in a conversation, you say something out loud and then you try and modify it as you go along. Here, what you do is you say something, you think about what you say, you stop, and you say, no, I shouldn't have said that. I'll say something different. And we do that instead.
Okay.
It's complete control over what you're saying. Would you mind introducing yourself, saying what your name is and your organisation?
Hi, I'm Dave O'Brien. I'm co-chair of the Restraint Reduction Network, along with my colleague, Bengi O'Reilly.
If there was anything you wanted people to go away from this conference with as a priority, what would it be?
It's a great question. Generally, the people that come to the conference are already inquisitive and they are looking for change and they want to be part of that change. So we're not convincing people in the conference to reduce restrictive practice. We're actually seeing that people that come in are wanting to understand how. So if they could go away with one thing, it would be one idea that they can use back where they work to reduce the restrictive practices.
What are restricted practices? For the listener who don't
Sure.
know that term, what does that mean for you?
Again, a great question. So restrictive practices are best defined as something that happens to another person that stops them doing what they want or makes them do something they don't want to do. Now, that can be quite subtle, the locking of a door or restricting access to outside space, or it can be more obvious, like physical restraint with people holding parts of another person's limbs.
I have felt very welcome here as an autistic person at your conference. Is that a purposeful thing from the organisation to make people like me who otherwise might seem a bit scary as protesting advocates to include us?
Absolutely. One of the things that the RRN has as a core aspiration and mission is to ensure that people with lived experience have every opportunity to be part of the conversation about how to reduce restrictive practice. That includes attendance at conferences, webinars, events, but also to be part of a network of members who are driving to reduce restrictive practice. And you have to find adjustments that work for people in a way that's unique to them. That might include providing quiet space. That might include providing accessible information, but it also includes that kind of emotional support. Restrictive practice is a particularly traumatic experience. And if we have people here who have experienced it or know someone who's experienced it, we recognize that sometimes these kind of events can trigger memories. And it's important that as an organization, we support people through that process. But also there will be people with lived experience, people who are neurodiverse, people with a learning disability, who don't know what restricted persist. They've never experienced them or they've never seen them. And we need to make sure we can get that message across in a way that they can understand.
It's very interesting, and I thank you for that. I'm sure the listener out there will feel as though somebody's working on their behalf. That's a lovely thing to hear from the professional group here. And if I could bring up the thorny subject of behaviorism and EBS, positive behavioral support, many people out there in autism land have a very clear negative expectation of anything based on behaviorism. So how does behaviorism inform the practice of reducing these restrictive practices?
This was a big debate in yesterday's conference. And if you ever get a chance to watch the panel discussions, you will be aware of the debate that was held around reducing or eliminating restrictive practice. And one of the conclusions I came away with was that behavior is how human beings navigate the world. Behavior is how we respond to the world around us. So for some people, that behavior is highly functional. And what you can't be doing is taking away a functional behavior that allows an individual to navigate a complex, high arousal, ever-shifting world and not replace it with anything. And I think what we have to be really clear is that PBS in particular is not about changing behavior. It's about providing people with opportunities to adopt behaviors that do not isolate them, do not impact on their quality of life, and keep themselves safe. And it's offering alternatives. It's offering a model of care that is driven by the individual rather than a behavioral approach that's trying to eliminate certain types of behavior.
Would it be fair to say that you are trying to, as an organization, distance yourself from a history of the application of behavioral science, when the application of that behavioral science was to modify people's behavior?
I don't have a lot of experience of using anything other than PBS. So I can't really comment on that applied behavioral analysis and that behavior modification. What I can say is I've been a nurse for 30 odd years. I've seen the world of behavior support transform over those 30 years. And I believe that what shapes behavior support now is the human rights approach, the humanistic approach, and the person-centeredness. That we shouldn't be doing anything to people, we should be doing it with them. And it is very much within the control and the decisions of individuals on how and what they want to do. And we live in a world now where that is far more ingrained in the care and support system than it was 30 years ago. One of the things we have to recognize is that the system of care and support isn't very good at accepting unpredictability. And I was talking to some colleagues at the conference, and we were talking about behavioral unpredictability in people, in human beings. And that exists whether you have a learning disability, whether you are neurodiverse, or you don't. And our behaviors can be unpredictable. They will often be influenced by the environments we're in and the circumstances we're experiencing. And for some people, their behavior causes concern. And I see restrictive practices being brought in partly to reduce that unpredictability, manage the risks, and to keep people safe. And there's nothing wrong with that approach. We want to keep people safe, even from themselves. However, when we normalize something like restrictive practice as part and parcel of somebody's day-to-day care, it becomes not about keeping people safe, but about reducing the unpredictability of behavior. And that level of control can become abusive. And we've seen examples after examples, Wharton Hall, Winterbourne View, where the culture of normalizing restraint led to abuse. Vast majority of people I work with, the use of a restrictive practice is a necessary intervention to keep people safe, and it is done with compassion and support. But sometimes it doesn't. And it is that part of the restraint reduction that we need to eliminate. So the debate about whether we ever live in a world where there is no restrictive practice is a great debate, because it asks fundamental questions about the purpose of restrictive practice. And we have to be very careful. It must be lawful, must be proportionate to the risk you're managing, and it must be time limited. We stick to those rules, and we will see restrictive practice being used as an exception rather than a rule.
I had a conversation with one of your delegates, a lady who did not identify as neurodivergent, but who had been the equivalent of sectioned, held in a unit against their will, to some extent. But the lady told a story about her being unable herself to regulate everything in her life. And she recognized that there was an instant when, while she was medicated, she left the facility because they had an open door. And she traveled by train and bus and then walking to her home to escape an environment that, in the state she was making her feel that she needed to escape. And then she said something interesting to me. She said she should have been stopped because she had no recollection of the journey. And in hindsight, having come through and got to a stable place in her mind and her brain later on, she saw how vulnerable she was. And she advocated for some kind of restriction, the restriction of keeping her in place. And it sounds to me as though you have a really difficult balance here to cope with, because you are damned if you do and damned if you don't. How does the profession deal with this difficult balance?
It's not easy, but if it was, then you wouldn't need highly skilled and experienced people to be involved in the decision making about when to use the Mental Health Act. And there are a couple of features that is helpful to recognize. And it sounds like this conversation with this lady, she lacked insight at the time of her crisis to understand what was happening to her and the risks that she was putting herself in. And it sounds to me that that understanding only came after she'd received some care and treatment. Now, that's a key point in a person's journey. So when a person is in crisis and that is driven by a mental health need, insight isn't always there, not exclusively. For some people, they still have insight and they know what they want and they are making decisions, unwise that they are still their decisions, and they have the right in this country under the Mental Capacity Act to make unwise decisions. And that can be about lifestyle. In those circumstances, it's our role to offer them insight and understanding of the consequences of those decisions. But ultimately, in this country, it is an adult's right to make decisions even if they're unwise. What changes is when there is something happening, and for the want of a better word, we'll refer to it as a mental illness, that is impacting on their decision making. And it is that assessment to understand what's driving some of the decision making that's a key and crucial part of what happens next. And for some people, detention under the Mental Health Act has saved their lives. And it sounds to me like this lady you spoke to recognizes that without that intervention, she could have had a very different outcome. And I have met many people who have said, if I hadn't been detained, if I hadn't been taken to hospital against my wishes, I would be dead. And I recognize that as a successful intervention. What isn't successful is when people are detained, and what we hear about in negative situations is when people have been detained and that threshold of a mental disorder that's driving that decision is less clear. And for people with a learning disability, there is research out there, there is evidence that sometimes people are detained and then on review or tribunal, they are released because the threshold is not met. So we may have a system like the Mental Health Act and what will be the new mental health bill in this country, but we also have protections and safeguards built in, including the right for appeal and the right for review in the tribunals, and they're heavily scrutinized. Every health board has a Mental Health Act officer. They have to scrutinize the paperwork, create those assessments, the decisions, and that is a key part of our safeguards around the inappropriate detention of people with a learning disability and mental ill health. Is it foolproof? Nothing ever is, and mistakes will happen. The debate in panel yesterday was fascinating because it tried to answer that very question. Should we be moving to an elimination or just reduction? And there is a consensus amongst many that restrictive practice have a place in the care services that we offer in the UK. And for some people, it will be a defining intervention that keeps somebody safe. Is that it is always used as the last resort, and we need to demonstrate that we have the capability of offering support that isn't restrictive, whilst acknowledging that when we do use a restrictive practice, it must be lawfully applied, proportionate to the risk you're managing, and time limited.
Thank you. Either fitting end for what we have here, and I thank you for speaking out on Autistic Radio.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Wonderful.
We speak our words, we listen.
We speak our words, we listen.
We speak our words. We listen.
We speak our words, we listen.
I think that's incredibly enlightening. In the text, Teresa says that this is interesting because I've been exposed to both of these things. I've received behaviour modification as a child, and I also learnt how to do restraint myself when I studied child psychology. However, I never practiced it. I feel that in Canada we've had a bad history of physical restraint with youth.
I should add also that I have been hospitalized at a time when it wasn't known that I was autistic. And so, from about the age of 8, I had a different diagnosis. I wasn't hospitalized until I was right on the cusp of 21 years old. And it's sort of like, I'm going to say borderline, whether it was my decision or not. I think I got to choose which hospital. But I was on a ward where there was no restraint. Just to put 100% context around the ways that I would look at it. Everybody has a different experience with it, but those are mine. I never did work in child psychology. I suppose the reason I took it was maybe to try and figure myself out.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do take psychology to figure themselves out. What strikes me when I'm listening to the use of restraint is that, yes, society does sometimes need to restrain its members, but the autistic people amongst that group, it's so counterproductive. If you restrain autistic people, the way our brains work is that we build up a resentment to that and we become entirely non-compliant, more than the rest of the population, I believe. I get what these people are trying to do, and I think it's beautiful that they are doing it. And there's another comment from Ray saying that there's good info here regarding the rules, and actually maybe we as autistic people, as a part of restraint reduction, should be, like Ray says, learning these rules and making sure we know what is and what isn't okay and what is and isn't allowed. Maybe we should ask the Restraint Reduction Network to give us some more information on that. I want to play another one of our recordings, and I've put it into the same set. I've put it as episode 3. It's because it follows on from the discussion we had just then about ABA, because Jessica comes from a background of PBS and also ABA in a previous life. Let's just see what Jessica has to say about this.
Hello out there in Autism Land, and welcome to Autistic Radio. We're making a recording today with Jessica Aviles. Jessica works with a PBS charity, Positive Behavioural Support. Positive Behavioural Support is not directly ABA. It is informed by the science of behaviourism, however. But here in the UK, PBS and ABA tend to be quite distinct, with some overlap. The reason we know her is that she is the clinical lead of an organisation which we here at Autistic Radio were fortunate to have an experience with in a co-production. So, having had that introduction, Jessica, hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Normally I ask people, what is the thing you want to get across? And they say a book, or they say a program, or they say an idea that they're having. There's something different about what you're trying to do. You're trying to generally make yourself accessible to us and start a conversation with us. Is that closer to the mark?
Yes, definitely. We've had the opportunity to work together on a co-production project, which has been very insightful and very thought-provoking. So I think it's just a continuation of those thoughts and reflections, really.
So in some ways, there's a little bit of trust that's built up, which we're not going to blow right now, yeah?
That's the aim, Jules.
Okay. Everybody can feel relaxed, you know? Background-wise, how did you get into the position where you are now? And what led you there?
Well, I fell into the field of ABA at the time. It was ABA, pure ABA. I'm originally from California and started working for an organization that was supporting, it was early intervention. It was working with really young children under the age of 5 or 7. And I just got to play a lot. I got to play with these kids. And it was something that I really enjoyed. I'm a big kid at heart. So it was something that felt quite natural to play and to learn through play. And I just, because it felt so natural, and I was at that point in my life where I wanted a career in psychology, but didn't really know what. I was exploring different things. That just seemed like the natural thing for me to do. So I ended up going and studying in the United States. My degree is in counseling as opposed to PBS or ABA. It's more, I would say, well-rounded, but still rooted in behaviorism. And had the opportunity of just working with a lot of people, young people, typically autistic children and adolescents. When I graduated, I really just wanted to have a better work-life balance. So moved to the United Kingdom. I know some people laugh at me, this idea of work-life balance being achieved in a city like London, but when you come from a place like the United States, there is a lot of differences. I was sponsored and I got an opportunity to continue to work and consult with families through a special school here in the UK. That was a bit of a culture shock for me, given the differences of behaviorism in the UK versus the US. And yeah, 15 years later, here I am. I've definitely changed, essentially. My practice has evolved over time, etc.
I'm going to jump on something you've just said there and try and explore it.
Yes, please.
Yeah, it's the difference that you pointed out between your training and your experience in the United States and what you found over here. Not your own personal work-life balance, but what's happening in autism here in the UK that's different from your previous experience.
I've been out of the US for a while now. At the time when I was in the US, the work I was doing was widely accepted as this is how you support autistic children and young people in schools, at home, in the community. When I came to the UK, it was still a bit like that, but I was working at a special school. We lived in a bit of a bubble. And the more I started to look up and look out, that's when I started to see the real difference. The real difference being the values and the focus being on the person-centered approach to supporting people as opposed to behavior modification, getting autistic people or children to sort of fit in this square that they shouldn't have to fit in. That I would say is a big difference. I think the field has changed in both. Definitely alive and thriving, this focus of values and this focus of supporting autistic people to live happy lives and in whatever makes them happy, as opposed to what society is deeming as this is what makes you happy.
Let's concentrate just on that concept of the difference in values that you perceive developing here in the UK to the difference in values over in the US.
Mm-hmm.
When you say values, what values?
What I mean is what's important to the individual, not what's important for the people supporting the individual. You can very easily get stuck in this idea that this is what's going to make someone happy. Whereas if you just sit and understand the person a bit more to understand what will make them happy is something very different. Does that make sense, Jules? I'm wondering if that's a good explanation for that.
Oh, please remember that I'm not here to put words in your mouth, Jessica.
Yeah, I know.
You have your thoughts, your opinions, and
Yeah.
you need to feel confident that they can be expressed here without
Right.
permission from me or anybody else here.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarity. Yeah. How did those values make me think differently? I have always sort of seen the importance of knowing who the person is, understanding who the person is and why they do what they do and what needs are not being met. And how can I, as a professional, support them in getting those needs met? And I think it's very simple, but often people can get quite distracted by what other people think that person needs, or because they are non-vocal, that they can't express what they want and what they need. But if you sit with someone long enough and you observe what they're doing and you listen to them in other ways that are beyond just words, you can truly understand what someone needs and how you can support or adjust the environment around them to be able to get their needs met in a way that they haven't been met before. And I think that is what I mean by values. It's
Let me
about
try something.
Yeah,
Let me try a statement and see if you agree with it.
sure.
You see the values that are developing in your profession here differ because you see it as person-centered here in
Mhm.
a more valuable way, and you see that there has been influence that has come from the autistic community that has informed what is being done here. Do those statements make sense to you?
The statements do make sense. I do think it's the person-centeredness that is like, well, obviously, to me as a practitioner, obviously that's what this is all about. For me as a practitioner, it isn't just because the autistic community has said this. It's because that's how I see the world as a human being, but it's also listening to the autistic community and saying, well, yes, again, obviously we need to listen to you to understand you, what you think support is and what support you think is needed. Yeah.
That feels very clear and very honest,
Okay.
you saying that, because what you've done is you've given a qualification to the two different concepts. What you've just expressed is to say that as far as you're concerned, you do actually feel that it's part of you to see it this way, that person-centeredness is obvious.
Mhm.
And then you've gone, when I've tried to encourage you to think that maybe some of this has come from the autistic community itself, you've retracted a little on that, and you've said, well, that hasn't actually been the main thing for you. It's been you that's been the main thing for you, because this is the way you think. And thank you for that honesty. You know, I think you're right. I think however a practitioner comes across in the same way that you do, looking for that person-centeredness, it's unlikely that much has been taken from the nebulous concept of autistic community out there, that it has come from us. So Is what you're doing with us part of a movement to kind of alter that balance slightly?
I think it's about, I think it's a good question. Is it about altering that movement? I think it's about recognizing there are more similarities than we think. And I think in terms of how we see things, I think that it's being a behavior analyst, I've been lumped, and then I'm just speaking for myself as a behavior analyst and practitioner in the field for some time. I've been lumped into this, your approach is this way, you are like this. And very often I think, but that's not me. But if you got to know me and you've got to know what I've done and the impact I've had with the clients that I've had over the years that I've worked with, I don't know that you would still say the same thing about me as a practitioner. So I guess it's about finding that there is space for the autistic community to have their truth from their experience, from their lived experience. And it's also possible for practitioners to have their truth from their lived experience, and that they're not always mutually exclusive or on the opposite ends of the spectrum of what is right and what is wrong.
What I'm hearing is you feeling that you haven't been represented fairly as part of your profession. And if people knew what you actually did and what your real thoughts were, rather than caricatures out there on social media, people would feel differently about you, as your clients probably feel differently about you, and the people who work with you feel differently about you. There's this sense of you saying, it's not fair. People don't give me a chance. They think beforehand, I'm going to be this. Is that basically it?
Kind of. Yes, it is. But also, I don't feel that it's unfair. I actually just feel it is what it is. I understand why people feel very strongly about the field as a whole historically, because historically, there have been norms of the practice that are not norms today for many practitioners. And I could say that hand on heart for every practitioner that works in my organization, that we have a culture that aligns with hearing the individual's voice, being person-centered, identifying what does quality of life mean for them, and helping them to achieve the tools necessary to see that as a reality, not just a dream and a hope. Yeah.
As well. However, out here in Autism Land, there are people who are going to hear you saying that, and it's almost like you would say that, wouldn't you? Where is the mechanism to make a change? Where's the route to change what you see as an incorrect perception?
Well, I think having conversations like this, for one, being able to work together on projects like we've done, the co-production project has given us an opportunity to look at the detail and understand what's missing. I think that there is, as a field, the UK SBA, being one of the directors on the board, the focus for the field, for guiding the field, is aligned with that. Those are some mechanisms in which, as a company and then as a sort of organization that has a registry of these practitioners in the UK, are ways in which it has already started, I feel anyway, to change that, to challenge that.
If it's okay there, Jessica, I want to bring in a texter here, and it's somebody with a poor experience. They say that their experience is that their experience of service is that the person paying for services should decide outcomes that are being worked towards. And I think knowing the person who's texting, the implication there is that professionals are, in his experience, deciding these outcomes, and he is actually the person footing the bill for the professionals who get involved in his life.
Well, I feel like I honestly can't speak to that specific situation, given services is one word to describe many different people that could support an individual. And each organization, each service will do things differently. I could speak to how we do it at PSG, where we will receive a referral to support an individual. And we always identify, are we the right service for this individual before, once, yes, in fact, we can support this individual. We are the right service. We sit and understand what is needed with the individual, with their families and their carers, and look at setting goals. What are the goals you want to achieve? And so in PSG, all goals are co-produced and targeted, or are because the individual, it's what's important to them. We also have a duty as a service to then make sure that the goals are written in a way that we're supporting something based off of the referral. So if we get a referral because an individual has shown up in hospital due to suicidal ideation or a suicide attempt, our goal isn't just to get them on the local football team if that's what they want to do. It's also to think about, what are the things that are going to keep you safe? What's going to help you to no longer feel that that the only way to escape this pain or the feelings that you're feeling is by ending it all? How can we support you? What skills can we give you? And yes, it will be enriching your life by getting on that football team or finding other extracurriculars, but it'll also be things like coping strategies. What are the coping strategies you need to either refine or to develop, so when the going gets hard, you can manage, you can work through, there are more options than harming yourself. So it's striking a balance for us. We will obviously not impose any targets on any individual, but we will also make sure that we're having those discussions about, what else do you need? I know for myself, sometimes when I'm in the thick of a crisis, I don't know what I need. And sometimes I need someone whom I trust and have good, solid rapport with to just listen to me, to almost feed back and guide me to what I'm trying to say or what I might need.
Robbie continues in the text to say that when social care paid for support for him, it was social care, an outside body, part of our local authority here, that chose the outcomes that he was working towards and not himself.
I don't think that's great. I don't agree with that at all. I think choosing outcomes, it's never going to work in the field.
But I also want to point that when you're speaking, you're saying that you are always asking the individual, but then you're also saying to the individual, when the individual can't make choices for themselves, that this might be helpful if we lead you in this direction. So everything that I'm seeing as directed by the autistic person comes from an individual that's in a very tricky situation in the first place, and the power balance is enormous. So at the back of this, it makes me feel if the primary way is to relate to an individual is to hear from them directly, that seems appropriate. But it also seems appropriate that that individual has some other backing from an autistic standpoint, where maybe a group of the people around them can give them a bit of a background so that they can then communicate with you. It feels to me as though the practitioner themselves is in such a position as to decide everything for the person, even if that's not what they intend.
Sure. I hear that, Jules. And I would say that setting those targets and coming up with goals in a time of crisis for an individual, that's one aspect of how we set goals. We will speak to other people in that individual's life that are closest to them, that know them, that are their advocates, their parents, their carers, their support workers, their actual advocates, if they have advocates, their key workers. And it's a joint up approach. I completely agree with you that it's important to recognize a power dynamic. We address that power dynamic by being very honest and open with the individual to say, you are the expert of your behavior and what you're going through. You are the expert of your life, and we are here to help you, but you are the expert of your experience. And I think there's something very powerful in being able to tell someone that and actually be forthcoming with that. It helps to take this idea that because you're the professional, you're the expert. I may know a few things, and I may know how to help you in ways that you may not know yet how to help yourself. But you only know you and your lived experience, and the people around you will know you and your lived experience to a lesser degree than you know, but still a higher degree than me as a professional. And I think that's really important to say and to be very honest about as we're building rapport with our clients in those very early stages of goal setting and getting to know one another.
Okay.
As for Robbie's point,
If you wish, yeah.
I think it's poor practice. If I'm speaking bluntly, that never should have happened. Because the reality is, for any positive changes to happen and to actually be maintained and sustained beyond social care support, beyond PSG support, there needs to be collaboration and co-production and a motivation and buy-in from the start. If someone's going to tell me these are going to be your outcomes, these are going to be your goals, I'm going to say, I think you should go somewhere with it because I'm not going to do that. And it's never going to last. If I'm starting on that footing, I'm never going to make the changes that they think I should make. So I think it's absolutely terrible that that's happened to you, Robbie. And I think if anyone knows anything about how do you get people to change behavior and make positive changes in their lives, the only way they're going to do it is if they're actually bought into the idea that this is going to work for me. And it's never going to work if someone's telling you this is the only way it's going to work.
I think there is a problem in what you've described, though. You've described a situation where somebody needs support, they're in crisis, and you're offering that. And you say, from your own point of view, there are times when you need somebody to step in your own life to say, hey, you need this advice. And that's expected and understood. We're human beings. But in the power imbalance situation, when you've got this client that you're asking this client to be the expert on their own autism, and then you also have knowledge of autism, they are so unequal in this situation, and they don't have any influence from another autistic standpoint, the autistic standpoint of the wider autistic experience from other autistic people. They are isolated with you, and they have to be the advocate for the whole of the autistic experience in front of you, and they can't do that. That's not possible for people. But everything in what you say puts them into that situation where they have to self-advocate for themselves against a happy professional that's on their game whilst they're in crisis. I feel as though there has to be something that supports that individual that has an autistic sensibility about it by some means. And how do we produce that if you think it's desirable?
So what I'm hearing you say is that they don't have anyone else who has an understanding of their autism that isn't a professional. Is that what you're saying?
I think that's one scenario, but it's not about black and white. It's about
Right.
a general feeling that the majority of what they're hearing is coming from an autism professional who has a sense and a program and a way of dealing with things. And they're going to get caught up in that because they're vulnerable enough to not be able to express themselves in the best way possible. And the people around them advocating may not be in tune with the autistic sensibility. They may be neurotypical themselves, or they may be school teachers, or a second parent, or another person who is, the people you're in are in crisis, and they are vulnerable, standing naked in front of you with their brains exposed for you to play with.
Oh, wow. That's pretty extreme. Yeah, I guess I don't really see it that way, Jules, if I'm totally honest. I think, yes, people can come to us in crisis. That is definitely something that is sort of why PSG sort of exists to start, is to help people when they're in crisis. I think there's something, I don't know, something doesn't sit quite right with that description for me there, Jules. And I think what doesn't sit right, it feels almost like the description almost insinuates that they're to be molded by the professional. Tell me if that's not what you meant. Because
I think there is an insinuation there, and it was intended to be provocative. Sometimes if I'm provocative, it gives you the option to counter it.
Yeah, because
do you get the image though? It's an image.
No, I get the image, and it doesn't sit right with me, Jules.
It feels very real to me.
Well, in it, I'm like, oh, in my brain, I'm a bit like, oh, that sounds awful and vulnerable. And I think, yes, I think what you're saying highlights a level of vulnerability that every professional should take seriously and be absolutely aware of. The level of vulnerability an individual in crisis has when they show up or when they come in contact with your service as a professional. And I think that's where it's really important to take a trauma-informed approach and a person-centered approach to supporting individuals in crisis, because you're recognizing that vulnerability, you're recognizing the power dynamic, you're recognizing that whatever and however you support this individual can go one of two ways. It can help to rewire historic trauma that's happened by the lack of support or person-centered support for an individual, or it can add to that trauma. And I think what you're saying, yes, very provocatively, is important to recognize. And I think part of me feels not uncomfortable, but what am I trying to say? I think for me, it is about recognizing the vulnerability and the importance of staying person-centered and staying rooted in the values of supporting the individual so that they can have a positive experience, not just they don't come into services to have like, oh, positive experience with me as a practitioner. Yes, I want them to have a positive experience with me as a practitioner, but I want them to have a better quality of life than how they were when they were referred to our service.
Thank you for accepting that rather provocative scenario that I presented to you. There's a lot for us to talk about, and we're not going to fix anything in a conversation right here, Jessica.
No.
Have you enjoyed the experience of talking and texting with the group today?
I have. I enjoy challenge. I'm not sure if I rose to it in the way that anyone's expected, but I do really enjoy the opportunity to have these discussions. And I think it ties back to your question previously, which was, how do we make those shifts? And I think sitting in this discomfort, I'm feeling discomfort right now. Sitting in this space, I think, and having these discussions is so important to be able to come to a space where we can coexist and welcome all experiences without having to demonize one or the other.
Yeah, I look forward to an ongoing conversation with you, Jessica, over the years. I'm going to leave the last comment to Ray here. He says, "Welcome to the autistic experience. All my points are generally covered here, but I'm sure that Ray has other things to think about and will ask you about next time we speak again, Jessica. Is that something you're willing to do for us?"
I am more than willing to do that, and thank you for welcoming me, Ray. Much appreciated. Thank you for having me.
Autistic Radio is here to open up conversations in a safe space for both professionals and autistic people themselves. If you have something to add to this conversation, feel free. news@autisticradio.com. You'll find lots of different conversations on our website covering a wide range of subjects, some of which are uncomfortable. Cheers for now.
We speak. Our words. We listen.
We speak. Our words, we listen.
We speak. Our words. We listen.
We speak. Our words, we listen.
That was really interesting to me, and I hope that Autistic Radio, Autistic Association will continue their co-production with the organisation that Jessica Aviles represents as a clinical lead. It's quite a lot to take in. But the most important thing for us here at Autistic Radio is that we have a safe dialogue in an environment that's suitable for us, the equity in the communication. And it's possible that Jessica felt slightly out of her comfort zone because she wasn't able to use her camera when she was recording with us, and she was in a slightly different way of communicating. Personally, I think when we use the Autistic Radio model, the equity in the communication brings forth revealing conversations like the one we've just had with Jessica. There's not enough time here, we've overrun, so I'm going to move us to the next part of Radio Days 3. I'll see you on the other side.